Usually, the UN, regional organizations, and other neighbors help them with this. However, this scheme through the efforts of Western countries did not work with Russia, despite our repeated warnings over the years about the impending crisis. The handlers of the Kyiv regime remained blind and deaf to this information. Meanwhile, as it turned out, they were arming the junta and preparing for war with Russia under the guise of the Minsk agreements. Therefore, it's not surprising that the most stubborn among them still pretend today that our special military operation started in a vacuum, and that Ukraine today has no problems that question the survival of this state. Reality, however, tells a different story. I think there's no need to describe in detail the true problems Ukraine faces today, nearly 12 years after the unconstitutional coup orchestrated near a Western capital. This is even being reported by Western mass media, much preferred to remain silent for many years. After massive corruption scandals that led to a series of high-profile resignations, the former comedian and his European sponsors are doing everything possible to pretend that the Kyiv leader knew nothing about it. About the criminal scheme being implemented. The truth about the repressive and authoritarian system that has been developing in Ukraine for years, leading to the emergence of thousands of political prisoners, is being suppressed in every possible way. And which other country in the world can boast a legislative ban on the language spoken by the majority of its population, and unprecedented persecution of the millennial canonical faith and the Orthodox Church? From since when did Europe that prides itself on its democratic values, start to consider such actions normal? The Kyiv regime has brought its country not only to poverty and civil war, but has made Ukraine a bargaining chip in the geopolitical confrontation between the West and Russia. The Ukrainians have already paid a horrifying price for these criminal mistakes and miscalculations, but they are being forced to pay even more by catching men on the streets who do not want to fight and throwing them into a senseless fratricidal meat grinder. Can any of the initiators of this meeting clearly articulate why Ukrainians are being forced to fight against their will, when there are realistic proposals on the table for long-term and sustainable settlement of the Ukrainian conflict, on which our American colleagues are working diligently? What do they want to achieve, the European curators of Ukraine, who perfectly understand the real, catastrophic situation for this state on the battlefield? After all, history inexorably shows that every new proposal for Ukraine turns out to be much worse than the previous ones, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of senseless losses that this country suffers due to the criminal actions of its leadership. Madam Chair, I compel forcing Ukrainians to fight and reject the peace terms offered to them. The European curators of Kyiv are, of course, not at all concerned with the fate of this state and its dignity. These are all tales for pink ponies or guppy fish, as they aptly put it in the Ukrainian blogosphere. The task of London, Paris, and Berlin is to buy time and prepare for war with Russia, a mad idea that in NATO and especially in the EU's Brussels today, they are trying to make it almost the only ideology that unites European states and distracts their populations from the socio-economic and political issues that have worsened as a result of their own leadership's mistakes and miscalculations. The issues. European politicians, driven mad by their Russophobia and impotence, are not embarrassed by the fact that Russia threatens no one. They alone are consistently pushing the topic of a future war, ignoring calls for dialogue and finding solutions to the accumulated problems in the sphere of European security, which are being voiced today not only from Moscow but also from Washington. Are all these Macrons, Starmers, Merzes, von der Leyens and Corlises really ready, following Ukraine, to sacrifice the future of European children for their own ambitions? And is the European public ready to believe in Russophobic scare stories, if one were to follow this suicidal path, which has turned Europe into ruins at least 3 times over the past 200 years? Colleagues, the hopes that in London, Paris, in Berlin and Brussels will suddenly see reason are very slim. And today's meeting, unfortunately, only confirms this. Too much has already been staked by the local elites, and too big a bubble of lies has already been inflated by them around the Ukrainian crisis and its true causes. However, it is worth remembering that at stake may not only be the ambitions and complexes of European Russophobes, but also the fate of the entire world, as an armed conflict between Russia and Europe, which is being so persistently sought, is unlikely to remain localized. This has already been fully realized in Washington, and we are grateful to our American colleagues who are trying to convey this obvious truth to the inflamed minds of Europeans. We are convinced that all those who truly cherish the ideals of peace, cooperation, and good neighborliness should join these efforts. That is, all the things that have been somewhat forgotten in Europe amidst the anti-Russian frenzy.